The phone was still warm from my hand when I set it down, the words still ringing in my ears. Small guest list, Mom. You'd feel out of place. I could still hear the laughter in the background, not his. A sharper, younger kind. The kind that rises easily when the people in the room feel safe together. I wasn't part of that room. The tea on the table beside me had gone cold, skin forming over the top like it was trying to hide from me. I didn't touch it. My fingers found the edge of the cedar chest instead, the one that's been in the corner for 32 years, smelling faintly of cedar oil and dust no matter how often I polish it. I lifted the lid. Inside, the tie. His tie. My late husband's wedding tie. The deep navy one that made his eyes look bluer in the church light that morning we said our vows. And beside it, the pearl hairpin I wore, the same one that slipped a little as we danced in our small kitchen after the guests had gone home. The one he teased me about because I wouldn't take it out until the very end of the night. My hands shook as I touched them, but it wasn't age. Not this time. I thought of my son's promise, a boy's promise, barefoot on the kitchen floor, head against my chest while cinnamon rolls baked in the oven. I'll dance with you at my wedding, Mom. The room around me was still, too still. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, as if the house itself was holding its breath with me. I laid the tie across my lap. It was cool at first, then warmed quickly under my touch, like it still knew me. Somewhere outside, the wind moved through the dry autumn leaves, making them scrape against the sidewalk. The sound was thin, brittle. I'd been uninvited without the word, pushed to the edges without the shove. And yet, I knew I was going to see my son get married. Even if I had to stand so far away, the wind was the only one to hear me cry. I brought over the napkins because my hands needed something to do. 36 of them. White cotton with a blue stitch along the edge, my stitch. A little uneven in the corners if you know what you're looking for. I'd washed and pressed each one until they lay like sheets of winter light in the basket. It was Thursday afternoon, the week before the wedding. The air had that gentle bite of October, and the front steps to their townhouse still held summer's last 2 geraniums, one stubborn bloom on each, as if they hadn't gotten the message. I didn't text first. I just walked up and knocked. A polite 3 taps like I used to do when he had roommates and I didn't want to embarrass him. The door swung open on the first knock because it hadn't been fully closed. Inside, the living room was a temporary factory. Boxes everywhere, thin curls of packing paper like confetti on the rug. His fiancée's laptop was open on the coffee table, a spreadsheet full of names shining on the screen. In the corner, a candle burned. It smelled like citrus and something clean. Her mother sat at the dining table tying little tags onto tiny jars of honey. Meant to be, the tags said. Oh, hi, the fiancé said without looking up, her fingertips skimming a list. She was in socks, hair up in a soft, efficient knot, a pencil behind her ear. When she saw the basket in my hands, she smiled like people do at the bakery when the muffins arrive on time. Perfect. You're a lifesaver. My son came from the kitchen with a stack of place cards. Hey, Mom, he said, stepping around a box without stopping. He kissed the air beside my cheek the way busy people do, eyes already moving past me to the dining table. Can you set those on the chair? Of course, I said, though he hadn't asked, and set the basket down carefully on an empty cushion, away from the tape and the scissors. He'd always moved like this when he had a project straight-line focus. In grade school, building forts, he'd pass me the blankets without looking. I used to think it meant we understood each other without words. Maybe it still did, but the words I wanted weren't the ones he had time to say. The fiancé's mother, Marjorie, though she'd asked me to call her Marge, looked up and waved a little, the twine hovering from her fingers. You're an angel, she said to the napkins, not to me. We were short on linens. The rental company has been hopeless. I told them I was glad to help. My voice sounded bright, a little higher than usual. I noticed a smudge on the handle of the basket and rubbed it with my thumb while no one was looking. Did the florist confirm the ribbon color? My son asked, his eyes still on the place cards. He has his father's habit of reading while talking. Letters first, people second. Blush, the fiancé said. Well, ballet. But essentially blush. She glanced at me. We're keeping it very simple. Nothing fussy. I nodded like I understood that ballet and blush were worlds apart. The laptop's screensaver turned on and off as she tapped, a little constellation of white dots pulsing against blue. My son's phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, skimmed, and laughed under his breath. Not meanly, just moved along by a current I couldn't feel. "Can I do anything else?" I asked, hands folding and unfolding at my waist. It was just a question, but something in me knew it sounded like a plea. I tried again. "The napkins can be rolled or folded. Either way is fine, but if you want, I can—" "Oh, we'll handle it," she said quickly, that polite kind of quick that lands like a nap thrown over a small flame. "We've got a system going." She held up a finished honey jar as if to prove the point tag straight, twine tucked, nothing out of place. "Right," I said. "Of course." My son's shoes were by the mat, two neat dark shapes with the laces tucked inside. A pair of floral flats waited next to them, the kind with a smart little bow. I remembered the year he learned to tie his shoes. How proud he was showing me bunny ear around through, his head bent close to his knees. I reached out and straightened his lace out of habit, then pulled my hand back before I touched it. There was no dust on the floor. No need for mother hands here. "Did you get the... you know?" I gestured to the dining room wall where the framed seating chart leaned against it. The paper was beautiful, thick and creamy, the ink a deep brown like coffee. Names in careful columns, table numbers in a clean serif. My eyes found his quickly, they always will. Beside his name, the bride's in a looping hand. On a nearby line, her parents, her brother, and aunt. I lingered a beat too long, scanning for mine even as I told myself not to. The chart wasn't complete yet, penciled arrows, a sticky note covering one square. Someone had written vendor meals 4 on the corner, and someone else had crossed it out and written 3. The fiancé followed my gaze. "Oh, the chart," she said, almost apologetic, almost relieved to have noticed what I was looking at. "Don't worry about all this. It's just, there's a lot of moving parts. Family tables, friends from college, work people. It's a puzzle." "I like puzzles," I said lightly, and then made my mouth still. I used to help him sort edge pieces and corner pieces on rainy days. The two of us leaning over the coffee table until our necks ached. We'd leave it half-finished overnight, cover it with a towel so the cat wouldn't scatter it, and go to bed happy in the middle of the picture. "Mom, do you mind?" he began, and I felt something loosen in my chest, grateful without knowing what I was grateful for. He smiled, sheepish, sweet in the way that should have belonged to 8th grade apologies. "Could you maybe be on dog duty Saturday morning? We're sending Jasper to daycare for the day, but the pickup window is tight with hair and makeup. If you could swing by, that would help so much. I'd owe you, big time." "Of course," I said. "I'd love to." The words came out steady. The small wobble came after, unseen. I pictured myself at the row of chain-link kennels, signing a clipboard, Jasper's leash warm in my palm while the women in satin robes laughed somewhere else. It was a job, a necessary one, a good job even. But a part of me felt myself shift a few inches to the left, to the edges of the day. "You're the best," the fiancé said. She meant it. She did. She turned to Marjorie. "We just need someone we can count on who won't get flustered, you know?" "Reliable," Marjorie said without looking up from her twine. "Reliable is everything this week. I stood there in my reliable cardigan, the one with the mended cuff where I'd caught it on a nail last spring, feeling useful in the way a spare key is useful. Important, almost. Also, something you rarely show people." He held up 2 place cards. "Which font do you like?" he asked, his face opened suddenly like a window. One card had a thinner script, the other had more weight at the curves. This was the kind of question boys bring to their mothers when they're 12 and choosing sneakers. He waited. I knew he wanted a quick answer. "The heavier one," I said after a breath. "It'll read from farther away." I said it like a certainty so he wouldn't feel the pause. He nodded and dropped the other in the discard pile. "Knew you'd say that," he said, a little smile. For a second, the room narrowed to that look alone. I set my hand on the back of the closest chair to steady something that didn't show. The fiancé's phone chimed. She glanced at it and then at me. "Oh, Friday night," she said. "The rehearsal dinner is just immediate family and the bridal party." She softened it so well, I almost missed the thing inside it. "It's going to be very casual. Pizza and a toast or two. Nothing you'd want to worry about. We'll send you pictures. My son didn't look up. He held another place card. Table 9, he murmured, and I realized he was counting out loud. I let the words settle, light as dust. Immediate family. The definition has a way of changing coats depending on who's speaking. I nodded, maybe too quickly. Of course, you'll want to be rested, I said, and reached for a jar of honey to admire the tidy bow. My thumb traced the edge of the paper tag. There was a tiny smear of glue on one. I pressed it flat. Mom, he said then, noticing me again. I forgot to tell you Sarah's aunt might wear navy. He winced a little, playful. Maybe pick something. Not navy? We're trying to keep the photos balanced. I have a muted blue, I said. More gray than blue, really? I smiled to make it easy. He nodded, relieved, then drifted back to the table, his shoulder knocking lightly against a box and his hand steadying it without looking. Marjorie lifted a finished row of jars and set them down beside my basket. You always were the crafty one, she said to her daughter. Then to me, with kind eyes that didn't quite see me, you must be so proud. I am, I said, and looked at my son's profile bent in concentration. The pride was real. It filled my throat, pressed against the ache sitting there. The ache stayed seated. Pride stood up straight. Do you want some tea? The fiancé asked after a moment, as if remembering that people are more than an extra pair of hands. We have chamomile, or there's coffee. Thank you, I said. But I should go. I promised Carol I'd check on her garden before the frost. It wasn't a lie, exactly. The weather had threatened to tip. The afternoon light was turning thin. Thanks again, Mom. He said it the way you say it to the neighbor who brings in your package when it rains. Sincere, grateful, a little distant over the fence. I lifted the basket lighter now and felt the napkins sway in their neat line. The door stuck a little when I pulled it open. He used to run ahead and push it wide for me with 2 hands. He didn't notice this time, and I was glad he didn't see me adjust my grip. I stepped onto the porch, and the October air met me like a cool cloth. The geranium on the left had a single petal fallen on the step, bright, absurdly red against the concrete. I picked it up without thinking and tucked it into my pocket, a small softness I could carry home. Behind me, their voices braided again. Numbers, lists, a laugh that belonged to people who had a place to be together. I didn't resent it. That surprised me. I felt something else, like the precise click of a drawer sliding closed, gentle, final, ordinary. On the drive home, the sun was low enough to catch the dust on the dashboard and turn it golden. My hands held the wheel as if it could tell I'd needed the steadiness. At a stoplight, I pulled the pedal from my pocket and set it on the seat beside me. It looked like a small, brave thing refusing to be anything but itself. The light turned green. I went on. In the kitchen, I set the basket on the chair where the afternoon pools. My house smelled like last night's apples and the faint, clean line of laundry soap. I put the kettle on reflexively, though I hadn't wanted tea at their house. The water hissed to a boil. While it heated, I opened the cedar chest again. The tie lay where I'd left it, cool but not cold. I lifted it and ran it through my hands, straightening what didn't need straightening, like a mother cupping a chin that's grown away from her. The phone vibrated on the counter, a text from my son. A photo. Jasper in a ridiculous bandana printed with tiny hearts, sitting beside a stack of honey jars. Thanks again for the napkins, he wrote. You always come through. I typed back, happy to. Then I added, I'll get Jasper at 10. 3 dots appeared, then stopped. A minute later. Perfect. I set the phone down. The kettle clicked off. I poured water over the tea bag and watched the color bloom slowly, then settle. The house held its breath with me for a few moments, and then let it out quietly, like we were practicing. Reliable, I thought, and the word didn't hurt as much when I said it just for me. On the table by the window, a small list waited, the kind I keep in the margins of crosswords. I added a line in neat block letters. Dog pickup, 10 sows. Then below it, almost as an afterthought, cardigan mend other cuff. I smoothed the paper with my palm, the way I'd smoothed his hair 1,000 times. Outside, the leaves moved against the light. Not in a hurry. Just enough to say the wind was there, even if you couldn't see it. The morning after I brought the napkins, I found the red petal at the bottom of my coat pocket, still faintly soft. I set it on the windowsill while the kettle warmed, a small flare of color against the glass where the first light gathers. It looked out of place and at home at the same time, like a visitor who knows where the sugar is. I made oatmeal because my hands needed a task and because it doesn't mind silence. I always stir counterclockwise. My mother did it that way. The spoon circled the pot, steady, steam rising and fogging the pane around the pedal. My phone lay face down on the counter. When it buzzed, I didn't turn it over right away. It was a recipe newsletter, then a pharmacy reminder. The third was from my son. Just confirming Jasper 10 a.m., thanks. No period. Efficient. I wrote done and added a smile I didn't feel like wearing, the kind you put on when the plumber arrives. I ate by the window, chair pulled in close. The bowl was too hot at first, then not hot enough. I kept my left hand around the cup for warmth. The tea had developed that thin skin again. I blew it aside, watched it fold, watched it drift, and thought how easy it is for a surface to look solid when it isn't. On the sill, the petal took the light the way certain fabrics do, color rising and falling with the movement of the clouds. I tapped it once with my finger, then stopped, afraid of bruising it. I washed the bowl, set it upside down in the rack, wiped the counter even where it wasn't dirty. At 9:40, I put on my reliable cardigan and checked the list by the telephone. I had written Dog 10 in tidy block letters. Below it, mail and sweep leaves. The leaves had started their slow surrender overnight. The maple out front lets go early, as if practice will make it easier. At the daycare, the lobby smelled like a clean floor and biscuits. Jasper greeted me with that earnest joy dogs have, wrinkling his nose into my palm like I'd done something grand. His bandana had pumpkins on it today. The girl at the desk called me sweetie and slid the clipboard toward me with a pen attached by a chain. Behind me, two bridesmaids in leggings and matching hoodies were discussing hair extensions and coffee runs with a cheerful urgency. They didn't see me. I signed my name and curled the leash in my hand so it wouldn't drag. Jasper walked a half step ahead, checking that I kept up. Back home, I put his water bowl down and let him nose around the back porch. The wind was picking up. It fussed with the broom I'd left by the door. I swept the first drift of leaves toward the corner where they always gather, leaves whispering over concrete, that papery sound like turning pages. The red petal had fallen from my pocket when I bent to unclip Jasper's leash. I picked it up and tucked it into the spine of the notepad by the phone as a bookmark for nothing. I opened the cedar chest for no reason that afternoon, just to breathe in the cedar and look. The tie lay as I'd left it, the pearl hairpin beside it. I took the pin out and lifted my hair, felt the cool of it against my scalp as I pushed it in. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed the pin clear as a small moon above my ear. I stood there longer than necessary, adjusting what didn't need adjusting. The pin always steadies me. It's silly, but it feels like a straightening of the spine. By lunchtime, I'd forgotten the stove on for an extra minute. The soup went from simmer to a hiss at the edges. I turned it down and stirred until the bubbles calmed, then poured it into a bowl and carried it to the table. I set 2 napkins without thinking, one of mine with the blue stitch and one from the drawer, a paper square with flowers. The paper one looked embarrassed next to the cotton. I put it back. Old habits don't leave. They fade slowly, like a watercolor left in the sun. I ate half the soup. Jasper rested his chin on my knee and sighed in that theatrical way of his. I put the bowl on the floor when I was done and watched him attack what I couldn't finish with vigor that honored us both. My phone buzzed again. A group photo from my son's fiance's friend's account. Someone had tagged me once, and the app thinks we're relatives. A long table at noon, coffee cups, a neat stack of menus, smiling faces. Final details, the caption read. I pinched the screen to see, found my napkins in a stack in the corner of the frame, blue stitches like a line of little waves. Everyone looked warm and busy. No one looked mean. That almost hurt worse. I folded laundry in the afternoon. The cardigan's cuff needed mending again. The thread I used last time had pulled a little. I threaded a needle and worked by the window where the light is best. Each stitch was small and neat, blue on blue, echo of the napkins. The petal was still tucked in the notepad, but every time I glanced at the sill, I looked for it there and felt a small, precise startle when it wasn't. I put the needle between my lips to free a hand, smoothed the cuff, and thought about how erasure doesn't arrive with fanfare. It leans in. It gets comfortable. It uses your coasters and forgets to say thank you. At 4, I went out to check the mailbox. It was empty except for a flyer about a gutter service and a coupon for a pizza place I don't use. Across the street, Nancy was coaxing her trash can down the drive. We waved the way people do when they know each other's names and aches. "You coming to bingo Thursday?" she called. "I promised to help Carol with her grandson," I said, which was true if I counted Jasper and moved some words around. "Next week," I added, and she nodded in that kind way we keep for promises with loose edges. At 5:12, I put water on for tea again. The ritual is a path my feet know without looking. Kettle, cup, the spoon in the drawer with the wobble. The skin formed on the tea, and I didn't blow it away this time. I watched it tighten, delicate and stubborn, then took a sip and felt it fold against my lip. The taste was fine. It always is. My son called then rare, these days. "Hey, Mom," he said, full of movement. I could hear the refrigerator opening and closing, the slosh of a bottle. "Quick question. Do you still have that old cool box, the one from camping?" "The blue one," I said, touching the edge of the cedar chest with my free hand. "Bottom shelf in the garage." "You're a lifesaver," he said, and then, "We have to run, but thank you. I'll swing by tomorrow." "Of course," I said, and made my mouth a smile so he'd hear it. "Great," he said, and the line clicked into silence. I stood with the phone in my hand for a beat after the call ended, then set it down gently like something asleep. On the sill, just where the glass meets the wood, a new petal had fallen from the geranium I keep in the kitchen. I didn't see it drop. I only saw that it had arrived. This one was darker, edges already curling in. I made a simple dinner: an egg, toast, a slice of tomato slick with salt. I ate it standing up because the chair felt large and ceremonial for an egg. Jasper watched with his theater sighs and then settled on the mat with the old confidence of a creature who believes in bedtime. I washed the pan, wiped the stove, folded the dish towel over the bar. Each movement was quiet and useful, each a thread pulling me forward through a day that had forgotten to call me by name. Before I turned in, I took the petal from the notepad and slid it into the recipe book where I keep the cinnamon roll card. It fit there like it had been meant to go all along, a red thumbprint on the memory of sweet mornings with flour on our noses, my boy's head on my chest, his giggle at the bunny ear around through. I didn't let myself stay there. Memory is generous and cruel in equal measure. I've learned to take a small bite and leave the rest. The next morning, the petal in the recipe book had flattened, its shine gone, a little triangle of color pressed between butter stains and sugar smudges. I made oatmeal again. I wrote another list. Cooler front, I noted, and tie ribbon on napkin set. I tied 2, then stopped. The house was quiet. The radio left off because voices felt like too much. Through the window, the maple shrugged another handful of leaves into the yard. I opened the door in my slippers and stepped onto the porch to sweep them toward the corner. The broom bristles made that steady whisper against concrete I find comforting. Halfway through, I paused and looked down. A petal had stuck to the toe of my slipper. I plucked it off and held it a moment, the red bright against my palm. I set it on the rail beside the older one on the sill and went inside. Later, when I turned around, I had already forgotten I'd put it there. These days, I find teaspoons in places I don't remember setting them. I'll be straightening the throw on the sofa, and a spoon will settle into my hand like it was waiting. I return it to the drawer and notice I am quieter than I used to be while I move through my rooms. There are small gaps where conversation should go, just a few words to tell the air what the hands are doing. "There we are," I used to say to no one at all. Now I keep my mouth closed, listening for something that isn't coming. Jasper went home in the afternoon, his bandana swapped out for one with leaves. My son waved from the car window, phone balanced on his thigh. His "thanks, Mom," tossed like a coin, making its arc toward a fountain in motion. I waved back, hand at my shoulder, the way you wave when you don't want to look like you're waving to a car. The street settled again, ordinary as bread. I took the cooler down from the garage shelf and wiped it clean. A corner of old tape left behind a sticky square. I rubbed at it with my thumb until it gave up and let go. The lid squeaked when I opened it. Inside, the space was empty, ready to carry other people's cold things from one place to another. Reliable. That word again. I set it by the door with a note taped on top. "For you." Back in the kitchen, the tea was waiting. The skin had formed in a perfect oval, the surface holding its breath. I lifted the cup and tilted it toward the light, watching the thin film slide and catch, the way a shadow will chase a leaf down the sidewalk without ever touching it. On the sill, the older petal had begun to fade. The newer one still blazed. I looked from one to the other and felt that quiet confusion again. The "am I here or am I just passing through" of it, and placed my fingers lightly on the cooler's handle as if to remind both of us that I was still real. I don't think anyone is being cruel. That has become my refrain. I say it while I fold the good napkins, while I mend the cuff, while I scrape the last crisp bit from the bottom of the pan and share it with the dog. I say it when I pin my hair and catch the glint of the pearl in the mirror, a small light I carry, unnoticed, above my ear. I say it when I see another red petal in a place I don't remember, inside the pocket of my cardigan, beneath the salt shaker, tucked against the spine of a book I haven't opened in months. Little flags marking points on a map no one else is reading. In the evening, the wind works the chimes on Nancy's porch into a modest song. I stand by the window and watch the tree let go another handful of leaves. The maple knows how to release without performing. That seems like wisdom. I turn off the lamp. The room dips into blue, and for a moment my reflection in the glass looks like a stranger inside my own house. Then I lift my hand and the stranger lifts hers, and we recognize each other well enough to say goodnight. On the sill, the petal holds its color a beat longer, then the light takes it gently back. The year he turned 8, the summer grew long and sweet as a peach, and our kitchen kept the season like a secret. Morning started with the radio murmuring from the windowsill's soft static, a song you could hum through without knowing the words. The window was always open. The screen held the world back just enough to let the breeze through, carrying the cut grass smell from next door and the peppery green of tomato vines we'd coaxed along the fence. And in the box beneath the window, the geraniums burned their steady red, petals bright as thumbprints against the leaves. Those were the cinnamon roll days, yeast proofing in a glass cup, a small fog on the surface like breath on a mirror, sugar measured with the back of a butter knife, warm milk that you tested with the inside of your wrist. My hands knew the steps, the way a hymn knows the alto line press: fold, turn, rest. He'd stand on the old footstool with the loose slat and dust the counter with flour until it looked snowed on. "Am I doing it right?" he asked every time, already certain and somehow still asking. "Perfect," I'd say, and he'd beam as if I'd handed him the sun. I wore my pearl hairpin on those mornings more out of habit than vanity, the same way I wore an apron when I cooked or tucked a dish towel at my hip. The pin had been my mother's and then mine, a small moon tucked above my ear. When I bent to check the dough, it clicked lightly against the cabinet knob, 2 soft touches like a private signal. He'd imitate the sound with his tongue against his teeth, eyes laughing, then go serious as a scientist again when it was time to roll. "More cinnamon," he'd dictate, palms spread as if he could measure spice by the width of his hand. His father would wander in then, hair still damp from the shower, tie draped around his neck like a ribbon on a present not finished. He'd kiss the back of my head without missing, and pretend he didn't see the flower handprint our son had planted on his shoulder. "What are we making?" he'd ask, as though the smell hadn't told him the moment he opened the bedroom door. "The usual," I'd say, and the boy would interrupt, "Special, Dad. Today is special." He had a way of making any Tuesday special with his certainty. By the time the rolls went into the oven, the house wore the smell like a shawl, sweet, warm, a little buttery at the edges. He'd stand at the oven window with one finger hooked in the apron string, narrating the rise like a sportscaster, counting the swirls as they lifted, 1, 2, 3. When the timer sang, he'd jump, clapping once, sharp and delighted. I'd pull the pan out to the cooling rack, and he'd lean into the cloud of heat with his eyes closed, face tipped up like he was catching sunlight. "Careful," I'd say, and he'd nod solemnly, a boy who'd just been entrusted with fire. We ate them from the edges first because the middle was too hot to be sensible about. Sugared fingers, butter melting faster than we could keep up. He'd lick a smudge of icing off my thumb with exaggerated care, and then make a face at the sweetness, because he liked to think he didn't. His father would take the middle roll in 2 bites and grin like he'd gotten away with something. Then the dancing would start, not always, not predictably, but often enough that it felt like another course. A fiddle song on the radio, or sometimes nothing at all, just the kitchen humming with us. He'd step onto my feet with bare toes, cool as river stones. My hands would find his shoulders and he'd place his palms on my waist with the concentration of a pilot. Around the small room we'd go, careful of the rug, careful of the cat, careful of nothing really because we were in it together. "You're getting heavy," I'd tease, feeling his bones lengthening under my palms, his forehead closer to my cheek than to my ribs. "I'm getting taller," he'd correct, laughing into my collar. He had his father's lightness and my stubbornness. It made for a determined waltz. The hairpin kept its place, the pearl catching the window light each time we turned. "At my wedding," he said once, sudden and ceremonial, "I'll dance with you first, even if people stare." His father, at the sink rinsing coffee cups, turned and saluted us with the dishcloth. "They can stare," he said, and the three of us believed it as easily as breathing. We made up rules for dancing we never wrote down. Never step on the cat. The person without socks gets to choose the song. If the radio fizzles, you hum. Sometimes the geranium gave up a petal mid-twirl, drifting onto the counter like a small red approval. He'd press one to my wrist like a stamp admit one, and we would bow to each other, ridiculous and perfectly serious, then start again. On the afternoons it rained, we took the party to the porch. The boards were cool underfoot, and the air smelled green wet earth, mint from the pot on the rail, the clean stripe of storm. Water stitched the yard with thin silver lines. He'd tap his fingers on my shoulder in time with it, our own metronome. His father would sit on the step tying his tie with the patience of a fisherman, loop and pull, and once it settled just so, he'd come take me for a turn as well. Tie tickling my chin, his laugh a low river in my throat. "You make me look good," he'd say softly, a private joke we kept for years. When birthdays came, we used the good napkins. We didn't have many good things, but what we had, we loved well. I stitched a blue line around the edges after he'd gone to bed, the needle dipping and rising, night after night until the stack was high enough for a table that always grew by one or two. In the morning, he'd fold them like ships and hats and crowns, a different kingdom at every plate. He made a terrible king too kind and an excellent sailor, always volunteering to rescue the stranded peas. He was a child who gloried in ceremony and also ignored it when it got in the way of fun. We had a house that made space for both. There was a Sunday, small enough to lose if you didn't keep it carefully, when the three of us made a picnic on the living room floor. The rug took the crumb, the cat took the opportunity, and we took our time. Someone, likely me, spilled iced tea, and it ran under the plate like a shy creek. He ate tomatoes with salt and honest surprise, as if the fruit had invented itself for his sake. When the light thinned, he rested his head on my thigh and traced the seam of my skirt with a finger as if reading Braille. "That pearl," he said, pointing up, not even looking. He never needed to look for it. "Do you think it ever gets tired of holding on?" "Never," I said, touching it. "It knows its job." He fell asleep there while his father read, the voice I loved turning the book into a small boat that bore us all. When I finally lifted our boy to carry him to bed, his arm fell across my shoulder like trust. His hair smelled of rain and sugar. The geranium breathed red by the window, keeping the evening warm a while longer. It is that house, the one where the pearl never fell, where the tie lifted us into turns, where the napkins were ships and crowns that knocks at my chest now when the kettle sings in a quieter kitchen. The present has its own sounds, my spoon against a single bowl, the hush of a broom, the thin tap of the hairpin against a mirror when I set it and reset it just to feel the click. On the sill, a petal rests and then pales, and I remember his small thumb pressing one onto my wrist with a ceremony that needed no audience. The tie sleeps in the cedar chest now, the knot still soft where a hand learned to make it true. Sometimes I lift it just to feel the silk give and gather, the tiny rasp against my fingers. The hairpin still finds its place, though more carefully than before. When I speak the words I keep folded inside about the dance he promised, about the quiet room where I see the table set and set again. I hear my own voice as it was then, sure of where I stood and loved for standing there. I can still see his 8-year-old face if I close my eyes, the expression he made when the music swelled and he pretended it was for us alone. I can feel my husband's arm at my back, steadying and silly, the rhythm of his laugh. The kitchen was not grand. The counter wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. We did not have new things, but everything we had knew our names. The symbol that bridges it, small and stubborn, is the same I lift now on restless afternoons, a single red petal, soft as a secret. Back then, he'd press one into my palm and declare it a ticket. Now I find one by the salt, or tucked into a pocket I forgot to empty, or flattened into the spine of a recipe card that still smells faintly of cinnamon. I hold it like proof that what we were together didn't vanish. It thinned and traveled, as light does through leaves. When I set the petal on the sill, the breeze turns it just enough to catch the light, and for a breath I feel the weight of his small feet on mine, the pull of his hand insisting, "Again, Mom, again." And the pearl above my ear answers with a quiet click that says, "Yes." Friday came with a sky the color of dishwater, and a wind that worried the last leaves loose. I'd already set the blue cooler by the door with a note taped on top. "For you," when my phone buzzed. His name on the screen, a rare thing in the afternoon. "Can you swing by around 4?" The message read. "Need your opinion on something." Opinion. It was a small word, but it opened a window. I put on my cardigan, pinned my hair up with the pearl, and slipped the tie into my purse before I could talk myself out of it. Not to give, not yet, just to have near my hand. I tucked a red geranium petal into the change pocket as if it were a charm, an old habit from a life when charms worked. Their street smelled faintly of wet leaves and something sweet, maybe the bakery 2 blocks over. Cars lined the curb, doors left ajar as people ferried in garment bags and boxes. Through the front windows I could see movement, a flash of satin, a man in shirt sleeves carrying a stack of plates, the purposeful drift of a woman with a clipboard. I lifted the cooler, balanced it on my hip, and knocked the way I always have 3 quiet taps. The door opened on its own breath. He was there, my son. His tie was loose, hair a little wild from running his hand through it. For a moment, all the angles softened. He smiled with his old mouth. "Mom," he said, and he did step forward then, one arm around me. It wasn't a long hug, but it landed. "Perfect timing. Come in." I followed him over the threshold, easing the cooler down by the coat rack. The house had acquired a temporary weather excitement layered over hurry. The fiancée Sarah turned from the dining room and offered me that quick, polite smile she wears when her hands are full. "Hi, we're chaos. Forgive us." "It's a good kind of chaos," I said, and meant it. In the corner, the stack of napkins I'd brought lay ironed and folded, blue stitches small and steady, a row of waves waiting for a shore. "Okay," he said, already moving. "I need your eye." He led me toward the living room where 2 frames leaned against the mantel. Seating charts, versions A and B, names marching in neat columns. "We're deciding between these fonts, and we moved some people. I want it to feel balanced." Balanced. I stepped closer, hands clasped so I wouldn't reach to straighten what wasn't mine. The paper smelled faintly of ink, the kind of thing you notice when you want to be useful. I scanned the lists. Her parents at table 1, his friends from school clustered at 7, cousins at 12. The bone-deep, unhelpful part of me looked for my name. It wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. The rehearsal was tonight. The charts were for tomorrow. I felt foolish and then corrected myself. I was here for fonts. "The heavier script again," I said, gentle. "It holds its own." He nodded. "Knew you'd say that." He laughed, quick and soft, a sound I could pocket. "Also," he turned the first chart slightly, and that was when I saw it. A sticky note at the bottom corner, a list in his handwriting. "Pick up. Jasper 9 a.m. cooler. Aunt Jen Airport 210. Mom corsage?" He followed my eyes, sheepish. "I asked the florist for a wrist corsage for you tomorrow. I didn't know if you... He looked at me then. Really looked. Like we were back in the small kitchen. Like he could still read what I was trying not to say. "If you'd want that." Want. The word touched the place I keep steady. "That's kind," I said. "Thank you." The warmth rose and then leveled, like a kettle just shy of the boil. A corsage is not a chair at a table. It is not a place in a photograph. But it is also not nothing. I let it be what it was. The coordinator clipboard woman appeared in the doorway with the efficient smile of a person who moves mountains by making lists. "Parents of the bride photo at the rehearsal dinner location in 10, she said to Sarah. "And we're doing a quick family toast before heading over." "Oh," Sarah said, glancing at the clock. "Right." She brushed my arm in passing. "We'll be super quick. You're a lifesaver with the cooler. Thank you." He stood a moment longer, his hand in his pocket, then pulled it out to tuck a stray hair behind his ear the way he did when he was 10 and trying to look composed. "I wish," he started, and the coordinator, already halfway down the hall, called, "We're on the clock," with the cheerfulness of someone softening a hurry. He smiled at me, an apology tucked into the corners. "We'll send you pictures from the toast," he said. "Tomorrow, after the ceremony, maybe we can grab a minute? Just us. I want that. Maybe. Just us." The hope was small and immediate, like when you catch a piece of dust lit gold in a sunbeam and feel for a second that you've been chosen. I nodded. "I'll be here," I said. The twist of the pearl at my temple felt solid under my fingers. In the doorway, Marjorie emerged in a smart navy dress, pearls at her throat, a shawl slipping just so from one shoulder. She looked lovely, and I thought how kind it is when a mother dresses like a blessing. "Ready?" she asked her daughter, then noticed me. "Oh, hello!" Her smile warmed. "We're off to the rehearsal thing, keeping it tiny, just a quick toast. We'll be back before 9. "Of course," I said. "Have a wonderful time." The coordinator called, "Cars out front!" And people began to move in that particular ritual of leaving. Phones gathered, jackets lifted, keys checked, kisses attached to air. My son grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, then turned to me, close enough that I could see where his shave had missed a tiny patch under his jaw. "You okay to lock up if you head out before we're back?" he asked. "You know where the spare is?" I smiled. "I'll wait until you're out the door." He leaned in and kissed my cheek for real this time, his mouth warm, the shape of it familiar as my own palm. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, and then he was shouldered into the stream, turned by it without knowing, carried to the door, to the car, to the evening. I stood in the entryway after they'd gone, listening to the echo of their leaving. The house settled around me. In the quiet, I picked up a small slip of paper that had fallen from the console table, a place card trial maybe. It said Table 9 in the heavier script. I set it upright against a vase so it wouldn't be stepped on later and laughed at myself for the care. On the dining table, someone had left a single honey jar with its tag untied. I sat down and tied the bow. My hands remembered it without instruction. The knot came out neat. Across the room, the napkins waited, blue stitches steady as a line you could follow home. I let myself imagine it, just for a breath. A minute by a hedge tomorrow, maybe after the photos, the two of us standing under a bit of sky, his hand on my arm. "Just us," he'd said. "I practiced the way you practice not crying when you taste the cake before guests arrive. Small bite, swallow, smile." When I rose to go, the wind nudged the front door. It shifted against the frame with that hollow sound houses make when they are almost empty. I checked the lock once, then twice, touched the cooler as I passed, as if it needed reassuring. Outside, the sky had deepened to that almost blue that pretends it isn't night yet. The rehearsal location was only 4 blocks away, a brick restaurant with old windows that throw yellow light like welcome. I didn't mean to walk by, my feet went on their own, drawn the way a hand goes to a pocket. I told myself I was stretching my legs. At the corner, I saw them through the glass. Sarah's laugh flashed like cutlery in candlelight, my son tipping his head to listen to the toast giver. Marjorie's hand resting lightly on her daughter's wrist, in that way mothers do when they are anchoring joy. The coordinator lifted her phone for a picture and motioned with 2 fingers parents of the bride closer. My son stepped back to make room, smile even and easy. For a heartbeat that startled me, his gaze lifted and scanned the window. Not for me. I knew that even as the hope rose, his eyes were ticking boxes, locating light, finding the camera. Still, in the small mirror of glass, my own face was suddenly there beside his reflection, overlapped and ghosted, an old trick of panes and angles, as if we were still lined up together. The illusion held only as long as I stood at that precise spot. When I shifted to let a couple pass on the sidewalk, our faces slid apart. Inside, someone lifted a glass. I couldn't hear the words, only the warm shape of voices. A server came outside to shake crumbs from a tablecloth. She startled to see me. "We're closed for a private event," she said kindly. "Tomorrow, we're open at 11. "I know," I said, and smiled so she wouldn't feel she'd done anything wrong. "I'm on my way." I took one more small step toward the window and into the angle where my face and my son's reflection no longer touched at all. Inside, he leaned to say something into Sarah's ear, and she looked up at him like people do when they think the evening belongs to them. She wasn't wrong. On the walk home, the wind was honest and steady, enough to bring tears to the eyes without making a scene. I wasn't sad exactly. I held the hope carefully, felt its shape, and then felt the moment it cooled. Not cruelly, not with a snap. Like a candle pinched between fingers, soft, efficient, leaving a bit of smoke in the air that will be gone in a minute. I kept my hand in my pocket, thumb on the petal as though I could transfer its color back to it through cloth. Back in my kitchen, I set my purse on the chair and found the tie where I'd tucked it, silk warm from being near me. I laid it across the cedar chest and smoothed it, not to straighten anything, just to feel the give. I reached up and touched the pearl hairpin, half expecting it to answer with its private click. It didn't, not this time. It simply sat where I'd put it, steady without encouraging me. My phone chimed, one new photo from my son, a shot of the table, candles burning low, the honey jars lined up just so. Almost there, his caption read. No exclamation point, no question. A statement floating on a square of light. I typed, beautiful, and added a red heart, the digital cousin of a petal. I deleted the heart and left the word to carry itself. The house breathed with me as it does at the end of a day. I filled the kettle and set it on the flame, then turned it off before it sang. In the window, my reflection hovered for a moment and then backed away as the room darkened. I sat, hands folded, and listened to the wind find the corners of the house. Somewhere up the street, laughter rose and then muffled under a door. On the windowsill, a real petal one I hadn't placed had fallen from the plant during my absence. It lay on its side, deeper red along the spine, the edges beginning to curl. I set it atop the one I'd tucked in my pocket earlier, a tiny stack of tickets to a dance that wasn't being called tonight. For a second, without meaning to, I rested my fingertips on them both. They were cool. Then I lifted my hand and let the small weight, such as it was, belong to the sill. Tomorrow would come. I would find a spot on the hill where the wind has a view. I would bring the tie and the pin and something to keep my hands from fidgeting. Maybe there'd be a minute just for us after the vows, behind a hedge in the kinder shade, a quick picture, a private word. Or maybe not. The hope rose and, obedient as a good guest, took its leave before it overstayed. I rinsed the cup I hadn't used, dried it, and set it mouth down in the rack, a small dome of quiet. Outside, a leaf let go without asking anyone to watch. Inside, the petal held its color for one more breath, and then didn't. I woke before the light did, the kind of waking that isn't a decision so much as a surrender. The house was a held breath. I lay there a minute listening to the radiator tick and the quiet insistence of my own heart. It sounded tired, not the kind of tired a nap can fix, the kind that settles into the joints of a person's life and makes the hinges ache. In the kitchen, the air had that September cold smell, clean and a little metallic. I reached for the kettle, then set it back. I didn't want tea. I didn't want the ritual that usually kept me upright. The mug on the counter still wore a faint ring from last night's water. I traced it with my thumb and left it there. A small, harmless stain. Proof I'd stood in this spot and been, if not happy, then at least occupied. The window showed a square of early gray. On the sill, the two red petals I'd left lay side by side, one bright, one dulling at the edges. I lifted the dull one, and it gave under my finger like paper that's been wet and dried too many times. It left a thin red line on my skin, the way beets do when you slice them. I rubbed my fingers together and the color didn't lift. I pressed my thumb to my forefinger and made a print on the back of a grocery list. It looked like someone else's small emergency. I washed my hands. It stayed. A child's stamp you can't scrub away. A reminder I hadn't asked for. I sat at the table without turning on a light. The chair across from me was still angled the way I'd left it yesterday when I folded the napkins and told myself it mattered. I straightened it and then moved it back the way it was. My body wanted to fuss with something. My mind didn't want to follow. I set my hands flat on the wood and watched the faint veins shift under the skin like map lines on old paper. I used to joke that you could get anywhere in this family if you knew how to read me. Lately, I'm not sure anyone's looking. The tie lay on the cedar chest where I'd placed it before bed. I carried it back to the kitchen because the kitchen is where I talk to things. I looped it around my neck and pulled it once, then again, an old muscle memory that knew what to do until it didn't. Halfway through the knot, my fingers paused. I don't know why. It felt wrong to finish. I let it hang, one end longer than the other, the silk heavy like a sentence you can't quite say. I touched the pearl at my temple and it clicked gently against my fingernail, as if to ask a question I couldn't answer. My phone lay face down on the table. I turned it over and there it was, a photo from my son sent near midnight. Candles low, faces softened by the hour, 4 glasses tipped together. In the center, the bride and her parents. My son stood behind them, smile clean and practiced. On Marjorie's wrist, a small corsage, white and soft and tidy. I imagined the florist tying the ribbon, imagined the scissors snipping the ends at an angle. For a second something opened in me, the remembered thrill of being known in little ways. Then the second passed. I set the phone down without answering. I didn't have a picture to send back. I had a quiet room and a cooling day and a list of small tasks that didn't need me, not really. I tried to eat. Oatmeal again because it forgives you for not tasting it. The spoon felt too heavy. Halfway through, I counted the motions lift, blow, swallow like a person, learning to walk after a long illness. I stopped at 8. I didn't know what number would make it better, and 8 felt honest. Jasper wasn't here to lean his head on my knee and remind me that finishing is kinder than leaving something half done. I carried the bowl to the sink and watched the oats loosen and spin down the drain. It felt ungrateful and also like the only thing I could do. A text arrived from Sarah. Just the wedding day schedule, clean bullet points and gentle emojis. The kind of message that means well and lands like a diagram. Hair and makeup at 7, photos at 10, vows at 3. We're so excited, she wrote at the end. Thank you for understanding about the rehearsal last night. Understanding is easy when there's nothing to do with it. I typed, have a wonderful day, and deleted it. Then I typed it again and sent it. The little delivered dot appeared. Nothing else did. The laundry basket waited in the hall, half full of cardigans and dish towels. I meant to pick it up. Instead, I sat on the bottom stair like someone who's been told to wait and doesn't want to be rude. My breath moved in and out, thin as paper. There have been tired days before, of course. There were years built of tired, stacked like wood. This felt different. Not the tired after work, after grief, after fixing something for someone. This was the tired of not being needed and pretending that isn't heavy. I remembered the list on the sticky note, mom corsage, and had to put a hand on the stair to steady myself, as if the memory itself were a step I could miss. It was a kind thought. It was. And still, in my chest, I felt the space where a chair might have been. A corner of the room with my name on it. A place to set my cup and not have it be in the way. The wind found the seam in the kitchen window and made a sound like a bottle cap turning. I went to it and pressed the heel of my hand against the frame. The sound stopped. I held my hand there longer than I needed to, because I could silence one thing and it felt like winning. When I let go, the sound returned, polite and persistent. Even the wind remembers itself better than I do some mornings. On the counter beside the notepad, the petal I'd set aside last night had curled in on itself. I lifted it carefully. It came apart in my hand, a soft collapse, red turning to rust, turning to nothing. The dust clung to my fingers and made a small crescent under my nail. I went to the sink again. Water turned pink and then clear. The crescent stayed. The symbol of it was not lost on me. I am not immune to my own metaphors. I dried my hands and sat back down. If anyone had come to the door just then, I would have stood up quickly, smoothed my sweater, put on my voice. I'm good at that. I can conjure warmth from the cold room and make it mean something for someone else. But there was no knock. The house did what houses do, remembered our footsteps, kept the small weather of our days. Mine was a low-pressure system with occasional clearing. Today the clearing hadn't happened yet. I took the pearl pin out. Not because it hurt, but because the weight of it felt like a promise I couldn't keep. I set it on the table beside the phone. The pearl rolled slightly and came to rest in the groove where the wood has a scar from a dropped pan decades ago. The sight of it there, bright, patient, lodged undid something in me that had been carefully tied. I didn't cry. I don't. Not much anymore. It was more of an emptying, the way a tide goes out and leaves shells and stones where water had been. I could see the shape of what had lived here. I could name it even, but I couldn't make it cover me. I stood and opened the cedar chest again, because that's where I keep the proof. The smell rose and met me. I lifted the tie, then set it down. I lifted the veil from years ago, and set it down too. My hands were performing a ceremony with no officiant. The hinge creaked softly. I left the lid open and walked away. On the porch, the morning had turned to an afternoon that wasn't committed to being any one thing. The street was empty in the way streets are right before something begins elsewhere. A neighbor 2 doors down dragged a trash can back to its place and didn't see me. A gust moved the chimes on Nancy's porch. They made a sound like a handful of teaspoons. I sat on the top step and looked at my hands. The red crescent under my nail looked darker in daylight. I pressed it with my thumb and thought of all the times I've held on. To a railing, to a shopping bag, to a child who didn't like thunder. My hands felt used, I suppose. Useful. I couldn't summon indignation at that. It seemed right to be worn by the things you've loved. What made me tired was the feeling of being set on the shelf when the loving took the shape of presence instead of labor. A car slowed in front of the house. For a heartbeat, my body stood up inside me. It was only the mail carrier stopping to tuck envelopes into the box. I waited until she'd gone before I went to see. 2 catalogs, a bill, a postcard from the dentist with a smiling tooth and a graduation cap. Someone's sense of humor on a printer. No handwriting. No presses of a pen that might have left an indent for me to touch. I held the envelopes like they might tell me what to do next if I turned them over enough times. Back inside, I washed the red crescent away finally with a scrub brush I'd forgotten I owned. It left a tender spot on the skin and a pale half moon that would fade by evening. I looked at the sink, the way the water runs and then answers to the pull of the drain. I looked at the pearl still caught in the groove, at the tie lying where I'd abandoned it, at the intact petal on the sill, brave and foolish in the same moment, and I felt the weight of being left out of the picture without anyone meaning to push me out of it. That's what exhausts me, not malice, the absence of requirement, the ease with which a person can be unneeded. If I could show you what it feels like inside me right now, I'd show you the kettle on the stove with the flame just barely lit, not enough to sing, not enough to cool, held forever at almost. I'd show you the pearl in the gouge of the table, white circle in a wound that doesn't close. I'd show you my thumb, clean again, and the ghost of red that remains when I press it against the page. But if you only need one thing to carry away, let it be this. A single petal ground down to dust by my own careful fingers, smeared invisible across a windowsill that catches the first light and the last. You wouldn't see it if you walked in. You'd only feel that something used to be there and isn't anymore. The clock in the hall struck a soft half-hour. I stood because standing is what keeps a person from sinking. I picked up the pearl and set it back in my hair. It held. I didn't ask it to promise anything. I looped the tie and left it loose, a thin weight against my chest. I folded one of the blue-stitched napkins and set it in my bag the way some people carry handkerchiefs. Not because I expect tears. Because I still believe in small prepared kindnesses. I turned off the dim flame under the kettle I hadn't meant to light. I wrote feed cat on the list out of habit, though the cat has been gone 5 years now. I didn't cross it out. Some items you carry forward. I stood by the window and watched the wind make a map of the maple. It pointed nowhere. Or everywhere. I couldn't tell. My body felt hollowed and light, like something that could be carried. Not by arms, by air. Invisibility isn't dramatic. It's a soft eraser working patiently at the edges. You don't notice what it's taken until you try to color there again. Today, I noticed. Today was the spot rubbed thin enough to show the paper underneath. I am that paper. I am that thin place. And still, the house holds. The frame is sturdy. The hinge creaks and answers. The window catches the little light there is. I am tired. I am very tired. But I am still here, pearl set and tie loose, watching a petal that no longer is and understanding exactly why. The house had the sound of a seashell held to the ear hollow, familiar, a suggestion of waves that weren't there. I stood in the kitchen with my hands on the back of a chair and waited for the old impulse to return. Make tea, set 2 cups, ask the room what it needs. Nothing answered. The kettle sat clean and indifferent. The blue-stitched napkins were stacked in their drawer like quiet soldiers waiting for orders that wouldn't come. On the sill, a single red petal had outlasted the others. It wasn't the brightest I'd ever seen. It had a darker edge now, a thin seam where the color seemed to be deciding whether to stay. I pressed my thumb against the window glass beside it and watched the print fog and vanish. There, I thought. That's what it feels like to be here and not be here. Present, then gone, leaving no complaint, only warmth that fades as if it never happened. I reached for the pearl hairpin and felt its weight settle between forefinger and thumb. I didn't fasten it. Not yet. I just held it above my ear, close enough to hear the small click when it kissed the nail of my finger. The sound has always steadied me. Today, it sounded like a tiny door closing softly, not to shut me out, but to keep something precious in. Enough, I heard myself say. Not loud, just the sort of word you use to tip a bowl back upright when you've let the batter run. I set the pin on the table within reach, not abandoned and not displayed. Waiting, the way I was. I lifted the tie from the cedar chest and laid it across my palms, the silk a river that remembered the way around my husband's throat. Over, under, through, gentle tug. I could have tied it blind. Instead, I folded it once and placed it in my bag, not as a costume or a claim, but as a kind of spine stitched in cloth. It would sit against my side and remind me that there had been a day when I stood in a room and was not invisible. Fabric doesn't remember you, not really, but I have learned that the things you keep can teach you how to stand again. At the far back of the pantry lives a pair of binoculars that belonged to my father. We used them for birds when he still had patience for afternoons and quiet. I fetched them and set them on the table between the pin and the list where I write ordinary things. Cat litter, stamps, call Nancy. The binoculars looked foreign there, black and deliberate, all-purpose and no apology. I ran a corner of a napkin along the lenses until they were clear. There, I said to no one. We'll see what we came to see. I wasn't making a plan. Plans require other people. What I was doing felt smaller and truer. It felt like choosing a chair in a room that had told me there were no chairs left, then refusing to ask permission to sit. The hill above the garden came into view in my mind, the one I've passed 100 times on walks, where the grass leans and the wind gets a running start. If I stood there, I could see the aisle and not be seen. The thought didn't make me brave. It made me calmer than I've been in weeks. I folded one of my napkins and tucked it into the bag with the tie. Not because I expected tears, though I've become practical enough to allow for weather. I tucked it in because my hands have spent years making things tidy for others. It felt right to pack something tidy for myself. On the counter, a small scrap of paper waited. Yesterday's grocery list with nothing crossed off. I turned it over and wrote 3 words, neatly, as if neatness could convince me I meant them. Shoes, sweater, hill. The pen left a slight groove. I dragged the pad of my finger over the deeper indentation and felt how decisiveness has its own geography. I tore the paper free and slid it into the pocket where I keep the pressed cinnamon roll recipe card. The card smelled, as it always does, faintly of sugar. The new scrap did not. Still, when I pressed them together, they belonged. The red petal on the sill had tipped onto its side. I lifted it carefully and held it in my palm. It warmed quickly. "Ticket," I remembered him saying as a boy, stamping my wrist with a fresh one pulled from the geranium. "Admit 1. I smiled, small and private, and slid today's petal into the book beside the old ones, each one thinner than the last, a timeline you could only read by touch. "Admit 1, I said again, and this time I understood. To the wind, to the view, to my own son's day without the dignity of a chair. I could bear witness without asking to be seen. It was not the role I'd raised him to offer me. It was the one I chose. I moved through the house as if measuring it for the last time before guests arrived. Not to tidy everything was already neat, but to decide what I wanted to carry. The cardigan with the mended cuff, the sturdier shoes that won't mind the hill. The small thermos I almost never use because tea likes a real cup. I filled it, twisted the lid, and set it beside the bag. The sound of the lid sealing clicked faintly, cousin to the pearl's small door. There was a brief, ridiculous temptation to leave a note on the counter in case anyone came looking for me. No one would, not today. Even so, I wrote 2 words on the notepad and left them where the light could find them. Back later. It wasn't a lie. It was a kindness, small, unnecessary. And for me. I took the pearl hairpin up again. This time, I fixed it. Not tight the way I do when I want to look polished. Only steady enough to know it would stay. In the mirror, the pearl caught the window's pale light. For a second, I saw the outline of the younger woman who used to straighten it one last time before stepping out to meet whatever the day asked. She didn't wave. She nodded, as if to say, yes, now. The phone buzzed once on the table. A weather alert wind from the west, light rain possible after 2. Good, I thought without thinking. Let the wind come. Let it move the trees and our small plans and whatever is left of the sting. Let it be there to hold me up if my knees feel suddenly older than they are. I sat and laced my shoes. It is remarkable how quiet a decision can be. No trumpet, no vow. Just hands doing what hands do, and a new thought settling in beside the old ones without knocking anything over. I touched the blue stitch of the napkin tucked in my bag and whispered, I'm coming. The way you do when you're late, and the people you love are already making small talk without you. Before I left, I cleaned the teacup I hadn't used and set it mouth down on the rack. I smoothed the grain of the table with my palm. I looked at the pearled hair above my ear and at the tie coiled like a tame thing in the bag. I glanced once at the window, where the petal no longer was, and gave the glass my thumbprint again. It appeared and vanished in the same breath. I didn't mind. Some proofs are meant to disappear without argument. At the door, I paused. A stray thread hung from the cuff I'd mended. I bit it neatly and let it fall. It landed on the floor and curled in on itself, small and done. That, too, felt like a kind of answer. I locked the door, checked the knob, a habit that belongs to women who've been responsible for more than one life, and stepped onto the porch. The air was cooler than it had been an hour ago. The maple across the street tilted toward the wind as if greeting an old friend. I adjusted the strap of my bag so the tie rested against my hip. The weight was slight and certain. I'll be where I can see you, I said into the afternoon. The words didn't need an ear. They needed a mouth that belonged to someone who'd decided. On the sidewalk, a line of leaves skittered ahead of me, the wind drawing a path I would have chosen anyway. At the corner, I looked back once at the dark square of my kitchen window. No figure moved there to wave. Good. I would like to keep this shift small and mine. The napkin's blue stitch pressed into my palm through the fabric of the bag, as if to say, here is your edge. Hold it. I did. As I walked, the thought that had felt too sharp all week softened until it fit. I cannot make them save me a seat, but I can save myself a place. On a hill, with the wind for company, a tie for courage, a pearl for keeping, and a red petal folded between sugar and flour to remind me that once, a boy stamped my wrist and told me I belonged. I believed him then. I believe the woman I became now. The street opened. The sky did that ordinary miracle it does when clouds part for a moment. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet brightening, like someone had raised the dimmer switch. I didn't hurry. The change had already happened. I was simply on my way to meet it. The pearl hairpin lay in my palm, cool and solid, catching the afternoon light like a small piece of the past refusing to fade. I had kept it tucked away for years, only bringing it out to remember, not to wear. But today, my fingers slid it into my hair with deliberate care, feeling the weight of it settle like a quiet vow. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, no calls, no texts. I simply took my coat from the hook by the door, the same one that still smelled faintly of cedar from last winter, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The leaves along the roadside shivered in the breeze, their gold and copper edges catching the sun. My shoes crunched over the gravel, and with each step, I felt something straighten inside me, a spine I'd forgotten I still had. There was no grand audience, no one to notice, only the soft hum of the world around me, the crows crossing overhead, the low rustle of dried grass. I drove to the next town over, to a small boutique I'd passed 100 times but never entered. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. I took my time, letting my fingers trail over silk scarves and hand-stitched cardigans. No one hurried me. No one looked past me to someone younger or more important. When I tried on a deep navy dress, the shopkeeper smiled, not politely, but warmly, and said, "That color was made for you." I bought it, without asking anyone's opinion. Folded carefully into tissue, it felt like more than just fabric. It was a reminder that I could still choose beauty for myself. On the way home, I stopped at the bakery, The scent of fresh bread wrapped around me as I carried a single slice of lemon cake to a small corner table. I ate slowly, tasting every crumb, not saving it for later, not offering it away, just mine. Back home, I placed the dress in my cedar chest, right beside my husband's tie. The hairpin was still in my hair, its pearl catching the last streaks of sunset through the window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting to be invited in. I was already here. It was just after dawn when I woke, though the light was still shy in the windows. The house was so quiet, I could hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock through the bedroom door. I stayed there for a long moment, listening, the way you do when you're deciding whether to get up for the day or turn over and let the morning go on without you. But something in me had already risen. On the dresser, the pearl hairpin rested where I'd left it the night before, its round face turned toward the window. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand, the way you might turn a coin you're about to spend, measuring the weight of it, the value. Today, I wasn't putting it in my hair. I dressed simply, in the cardigan with the mended cuff and a skirt I could walk in. In the kitchen, I brewed tea and poured it into my small thermos. The smell curled up toward me, warm and lemony from the dried peel I'd dropped in. On the table beside the thermos, I laid out the navy tie, still smooth from the last time I'd handled it, and folded it neatly, my thumbs pressing a firm crease. The air outside was crisp and sharp enough to pink my cheeks as I stepped into it. I walked, not to the hill this time, but toward the edge of town where the old oak stood by the split-rail fence, its bark dark and furrowed, its roots knuckled deep into the ground. I'd always liked that tree. It looked like something that had stayed exactly where it wanted to be, through storms and seasons, without asking anyone's permission. I stood there for a while, my breath curling in front of me, the tie warm now in my hands, and then, slowly, I began to wind it around the lowest branch that reached toward the road. One loop, then another, the silk catching the light in small, shifting glances. When it was tied, I stepped back. The breeze lifted the end just enough to let it sway soft, deliberate, unmissable. I slipped the pearl hairpin onto the knot, fastening it there like a seal. From a distance, someone passing might think it was a decoration, left by a stranger. But I knew it was a letter without paper, a goodbye without a voice. Not to my son, though perhaps someday he'd understand, but to the waiting, the hoping for a chair at a table that had been pushed out of reach. I touched the knot once, the pearl once, and then turned toward home. Behind me, the tie moved gently in the morning wind, the pearl catching the first clear edge of sunlight. It would stay there until the weather took it. I didn't need to keep it anymore. And for the first time in years, I felt lighter walking away than I had when I arrived. The sky was painted in the kind of colors that never last muted rose along the horizon, gold melting into pale blue above. I stood on my porch with my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the steam curling up and brushing my chin like an old friend. The morning air had that faint edge of frost, but I didn't feel cold. Not the way I used to. The house behind me was quiet, but it didn't feel hollow anymore. I had moved through each room the night before, touching the things I wanted to keep near a folded cardigan, the small stack of blue-stitched napkins, the cedar chest with its familiar weight at the foot of my bed. I'd opened the lid, not to linger, but to breathe in that faint cedar scent one more time. The tie was gone now, but in its place, I'd laid the navy dress I'd bought for myself. The hairpin was gone too, fastened to that branch where it belonged. It felt right, as if the chest was no longer just a box of what I'd lost, but a place to keep proof of what I'd chosen. I sipped my tea and watched the sun slide higher, letting its warmth find my face. Across the street, the maple leaves moved gently in the wind, no rush, no strain, just the steady give and take of something rooted and alive. I thought of the oak by the split-rail fence, and how the tie would be swaying there now, catching the light for anyone who cared to notice. There had been a time when I would have gone back to check on it, to make sure it was still tied just right, to see if anyone had touched it. But that time was gone. Some things I had learned, you leave in the wind. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked over to 8. I could smell the faint sweetness of the cinnamon roll recipe card in my bag from yesterday, pressed against the scrap of paper with the 3 words, shoes, sweater, hill. The hill would still be there when I wanted it, but today I didn't feel the need to climb it. My place wasn't something I had to watch from afar anymore. It was here, in my own skin. I set the cup down on the railing and leaned my elbows there, looking out at the quiet street. A neighbor passed, and I lifted my hand in a small wave. He waved back, his smile easy, without the weight of history. It was enough. In the distance, a pair of crows wheeled across the sky, their dark shapes cutting briefly through the morning light before disappearing beyond the tree line. I found myself smiling, not at them, but at the way they moved, uninvited, unannounced, and entirely free. I thought about the boy who once stamped my wrist with a geranium petal and told me, "Admit one." The memory no longer stung. It sat in me like a smooth stone, worn gentle by time and handling. I whispered it once more into the cool air, not for anyone to hear, but because the words still fit. Admit one. And this time, it meant me into my own life, my own peace, my own place at the table I'd set for myself. I picked up my tea, took a slow sip, and let the warmth fill me from the inside out. Some promises just take longer to keep.